Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Rabbit Trail Podcast. This is episode number 113. And
113.
There it is. And we're excited that you guys would be joining with us today. I want to welcome you, if it's your first time, to the podcast. My name is Greg Harris, and I'm the senior pastor at the church that sponsors the podcast called Olive Branch Community Church. And we are chasing the truth wherever it runs. And the idea here is that we're going to pick up ideas and run down different directions where we may have dropped information or questions were provoked from the sermon that happened on the last Sunday. And guys, what was our last Sunday?
Easter Sunday.
Easter, Resurrection Sunday.
He is risen.
Resurrection Sunday.
Risen indeed.
Easter Sunday, Resurrection. What, you know,
Okay, what is the deal with that? Okay,
I was going to say.
I've told some people, like I texted some friends, I'm like, hey, happy Easter. And they're like, Happy Resurrection Sunday to you. Is like Easter a bad name now? Is that like
some people think it is.
That's Pentecostal pagan, too
Some people associate Easter with the word Ishtar because it was in the
Ishtar. Wasn't that a movie with Barbara Streisand?
No, it was a really bad movie.
And for those of you that are old, you get that.
Oh no, I guess
Ishtar was with was it? What's his name?
Ishtar was a Babylonian god, and so there was this.
No, I'm
there's
talking
this
about the movie.
assumption. Oh, right. I'm just gonna go back to the original. So don't care about a movie. No, so there's some people that assume that somehow it's connected to that, but it's not. It's actually connected to an old English word that has nothing to do with Ishtar. I kind of dove into it and looked at it a few times. I'm like, no, it has nothing to do with that. It's just kind of this old English celebration that they kind of
they think the word comes from Ishtar.
Morphed with, and if it has any association with Ishtar, it only because the word East also has an association with Ishtar, and so there's some. I've watched some videos that actually argue that we were called Easters. People were called that because they bowed to the east when it was time for Easter, because that's where Jerusalem was and different stuff like that. So there's different interpretations out there, but it was Easter, Resurrection Sunday. So anyway, we're going to pick up on those conversations just like that.
And the movie Ishtar is it was was the bomb that was with Dustin Hoffman, remember, and Warren Beatty.
But it was Barbara Streisand, right?
I don't think Barbara Streisand was in the cast. You have Carol Kane and a bunch of others, but
really?
That was their bomb where they went around the world and it cost them lots of money, and it was like their biggest box office failure. That's what I remember. 87.
Awesome. And our resident movie expert is.
Man, I remember Ishtar.
Why don't you say hi, Stephen?
I don't know why I had Barbara Streisand attached.
I don't know if she's in the movie. She's not listed in the cast list. So
it was the way we are. We're the way we were.
That's the way we were. She was.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I like movies. My name is Stephen. Thank you for listening to the Rabbit Trail Podcast. I'm a little under the weather, so if you hear my voice with that deeper tone, that's what it is. I'm just getting over
deeper
sinuses. Really, is all it is. But if you're listening to us on the podcast on our audio, thank you very much. You've been listening from day one. You'll find episode 00 and 01. But I just realized that if you're watching us on YouTube, you probably think it's really odd that we just started the podcast on the number 80 something or whatever. And for those of you who may not know, we started this podcast as an audio podcast. And so if you have the inclination to go back and listen to our early ones without watching our faces, you won't be able to see our faces. Sorry. You can go back and watch us on Apple or on Spotify or anywhere where the podcast is. You should be able to find it.
Or even on our media page. If you go to obcc.church and go to our media page and then
you have to
hit show older and then look for the little rabbit trail emblem that you'll see right here. And they'll have all the audios there. It starts with actually 00.
Yeah.
So,
oh no, we're going to get into this.
Yes, so there's a whole controversy on whether or not this actually is episode 113, but we've let that go.
Oh, my son has pointed out there's another controversy out there on the rabbit trail that is there is a missing audio podcast, but it's on video, so you guys have seen it if you're watching. But
is it really?
Yeah, it's one of them's out there. It's just not. It doesn't play. So if you can figure out which
one it is. It doesn't play?
Oh yeah, you have to watch it on YouTube only. So
you know what though, I know that we've done it before where they don't play, and then we just tell Yvette to do it, and she'll put the
I'm sure
arrow in there and get it running.
But it's just not there. It's just
okay. And if any of you guys can find it, which episode on audio that doesn't play, and let us know which number that is. And if you're correct, we'll give you a T-shirt. So just
first
email me at rabbittrail@obcc.church. Let us know what episode that is, and the first one that lets me know, I will give you a T-shirt.
We have a Rabbit Trail email?
We have a Rabbit Trail email. We have Rabbit Trail T-shirts for people if they want to purchase them. Like this fine shirt you see here. And for many of you, it could even be a little flatter around the middle.
Oh, wow. We even do that for people, huh?
Yeah.
We have Rabbit Trail
episodes. We do our best. We do our best. But my name is Brent Brentshot. I'm the Connections pastor here. And again, just want to encourage you to send in your questions. We haven't had many questions come through our email in a very long time. So we just would love to hear them and discuss them. And we hope that you would like to get answers to the things that trouble you and keep you awake at night. So so here we go.
Like Ghostbusters, is that what you're saying?
Who are you going to call?
Yeah. Who are you going to email?
Yeah. But anyway, first off, we're going to start off with just the really bad jokes.
Brent and his terrible jokes.
Yeah. Okay, so
you have to write in jokes if you're not here.
What kind of a man was Boaz before he got married? He was ruthless.
Dude, who thinks of these things?
You know, I will say I'm compiling a list of bad ones and then crossing them off as I use them. And somebody emailed me that joke, and I've already got that on my list. So Brian, you and I, weak minds think alike, buddy, and appreciate it.
I got to give it to you, Brent. You can scour the internet for the most obscure.
You guys waste your time with all this, theology stuff. Yeah, theology and research and stuff, and so I am. I'm
just impressed. I'm absolutely impressed with your capacity to find just the
bad jokes. All right,
I got to give it that.
There you go. So again, this was Resurrection Sunday for those of you who
don't like Easter.
Easily offended, and it was Easter Sunday for those of you with thicker skin. So I am so.
That was
horrible.
actually funny.
Okay, you guys are going to kick me off this show pretty soon because we're going to have people protesting. But
we'd have attention.
Yes. And
if you want to protest at Rabbit Trail at obcc.church.
And don't mention that will get attention, because I will say this: since I've been little, I have done nothing but seek attention.
Me too.
So yeah, you're speaking right up my alley. So again, before we get into the sermon, I just kind of was thinking in my little head on the way up here, and thought, I know it's mostly going to be speculative discussion here, and ascribing false motive to some degree.
False motive.
Yeah, well, just motive that you can't really connotate,
suss out, as they would say.
I mean, my question was this: when Easter and Christmas are the most busiest times of the year for the church. Easter Sunday by far is the most attended Sunday of the year. Christmas, although it doesn't always fall on a Sunday, Christmas services are always highly well attended. Christmas Eve services or whatnot. So why do you think that is? Why do you think that people who don't necessarily prioritize church throughout the year, all of a sudden it becomes very important to them those 2 seasons or days of the year?
Man, there's so many reasons that we could speculate, obviously. I mean, I guess I'll go with some of the obvious ones. I do think that in many cases that there is this kind of cultural Christianity that people still hold to. I think that's disappearing. That's why you don't see the exorbitant amount of numbers that you would often have seen in the past on those seasons. But I think that there's just this sense of that's the thing you do. This is a religious holiday. I mean, this is about Jesus, and there's still a lot of people out there that I think Ed Stetzer would have called haunted, right, by Christianity. They still have that background memory of going as kids, and I think when you have kids, it kicks into this nostalgia of like, well, I want my kids to have the memories that I had. Right, I really do think that's a portion too for some people. Like, I want my kids to if you enjoyed it growing up and you weren't a big church goer, but you still want your kids to have some of the experience that you had as a kid. I think that might be a part of it. I could give you more speculative thoughts. But I'll open the door for more, and we'll do a poll. Hey, what do you guys think?
Yeah, really. And I mean, if you are one of those people that really make a priority out of Easter and Christmas and don't really do it the rest of the year, send in a comment as to why that is. In your case, it may not be the same for everybody. I mean, part of my thinking too is
are people who only show up once a year or twice a year going to listen to our podcast?
They might find it on YouTube.
No, I think they will, just because the bad jokes. I think they're like, I don't care about all this blabbering that these two other guys do.
But that Brent,
with those bad jokes,
he's funny.
I'm tuning in. But I mean, part of it too could be like, these are like national holidays. I mean, where it's a big family holiday. It's a big so people choose to go on those days because it's family. Because I know I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I don't think that we were the Easter and Christmas type attenders.
Cheesters.
But we were the Easter and Christmas type prayers, right? We had family over and we always prayed. When we had one of those big Easter meals, Thanksgiving meals, Easter meals, but we didn't really ever pray as a family, on a regular basis at all. Mm-hmm. So,
well, for me, I just think if people are only going on those 2 times of the year, it's probably because it's the cultural thing to do. A lot of times we don't have cultural events, especially in America. Like if you go to like Europe, there are like festivals people probably don't even remember why they started, because everybody comes out and it's the annual, we don't know why we have this festival, but it's still fun and people like to gather.
We got giant cheese wheels.
Yeah, they're just like, and it's like, oh, this is
bulls
cool.
are running down and we're going to run in front of them.
So, people do all kinds
Why?
And I think even though it has a uniqueness to that particular area, in some areas and villages and communities, it gives them a sense of community. And I do think that if people are traversing to church, it's because we live in a culture that doesn't really allow you a lot of cultural events anymore. And this is probably just the remnant of having some kind of cultural resemblance. Like, well, everybody's kind of going, there's a community there, it's something positive to do, and there's not a lot of those activities to do, I find. So that's great, and I think that's a good reason to go, but I don't think that's a good reason to only go. So for me, it's like, I'm glad that I wish there were more cultural shared events that even the church could participate with in the community. But unfortunately, for as much as the church gets blasted, we have cultural events that people want to attend. And even if they don't believe in the religion, they find some value in gathering. And I don't really know any bigger events like Easter and Christmas, where maybe the 4th of July in
Super
town.
Bowl?
Well, I don't think that's a community thing. It might be your neighborhood thing, right? That might be cool, like if your neighborhood had a whole thing. But I think the closest thing would be if you were like in the old time, they didn't have a lot of activities. Most of it centered around the church. Now we center our activities about other things. But maybe the 4th of July in the park here in Corona, we have the big fireworks and everybody kind of comes and kind of, whether they're patriotic or not, they're probably going out there because there's people there. And I imagine it's very similar to that.
Oh, yeah, it would be interesting. I mean, I think tradition is still a portion of why some people come. Like I said, hey, my kids grew up, we did this and I want to do it with my kids, that kind of thing. I think some people come because it's like their gift to mom and dad. There's this kind of like, oh, mom and dad want me to come, so I'm going to show up, and this is my one. I come Christmas, I come Easter.
It makes them feel good.
And I don't want to knock that. I think that's a loving thing to do. I think
you
that's
give
great.
me peeps in my basket, and I'll go visit your peeps at your church.
Yeah,
peeps are gross.
Like I know a couple people in our church who had their family members come, and their family members don't believe anything, right? They're not
Sure.
They're not Christians, but they come because in some ways they want to support mom or dad or whoever was on there, and again, I think that's honoring. Oftentimes I'm thinking about those people when I'm trying to set up a Christmas or an Easter kind of message. I'm not that. I realized after this weekend, I'm just not a sentimental preacher. I'm not I can tell feel good stories, make you like all warm and fuzzy inside, and I just can't do that. I don't know. My brain doesn't work like that right now, I guess. But
You need to watch more rom-coms and more Hallmark
I like
movies.
rom-coms.
Yeah.
I mean, I
His
like
family watches-
some of them. They've gotten raunchy.
He
but
watches Gilmore Girls. What are you
yeah,
talking about?
seriously,
I know
all the time.
My wife
That didn't
is
do
on
it for him.
another.
I don't know what else.
My wife is on another cycle of Gilmore Girls.
Yeah,
binging.
yeah. I
So
mean,
every time she's home
we have
alone
long
and I walk
conversations
in-
about Gilmore Girls and why we think it will last, why it shouldn't exist, considering who wrote it and the time period it was in was perfect, so it
Yeah.
created a better product than it
Today
should have
wouldn't
been.
exist.
And so it's just like it's a great show. Anyway, but I think that there's also just a sense that there's I don't want to put it this way, but it's true that there are people out there who say I'm a Christian, and then they realize I'm not going to church. Oh, it's Easter, and out of guilt they show up once, and then they kind of out of sight, out of mind. They may even show up for the next couple of weeks, and then it slowly drifts away.
And I liked what you said too at the beginning was, Ed Stetzer. I mean, how would you classify him? I mean, he is a church.
He is first of all, he's the dean at Talbot.
Yeah.
But
before that,
he's a church growth researcher
Okay.
and sociologist who studies
guy.
church growing and church planting. Yeah.
He's got a background, but I liked what you said about him saying the haunted Christians. Because I do think that although we are becoming more and more a secular country, there still is the ghost of our past, the Holy Ghost of our past, where we have received Christian values and Christian beliefs, in our families, and so I do think that term kind of that past, kind of haunts you a little bit.
Yeah.
It never quite leaves you.
Well, I would tell you that it's more likely in Southern California that you're haunted from the past of your faith if you probably grew up in the South or somewhere outside of Southern California. Most Southern Californians by this point don't have a lot of church background. Maybe there's the Jesus movement, that was
Calvary
back there, the
Chapel.
Calvary Chapel Jesus movement, and so a lot of their kids have a little bit of that. But to be honest, most of those people have moved away to a lot of red states and different stuff like that. A lot of people who've moved in from other states, they sometimes they come out of a cultural expectation that isn't like California, right? We don't have that cultural expectation to show up at church.
Like in New Mexico, where I lived for a while, the town was so small, you either went to church or went to the bar. There's not a lot to do. So people will come to church just because they're doing something. And so it's much more socially acceptable to have people kind of casually attend.
Out here, it's harder to.
You got
pull
more
that.
activities.
You've got Castle
beach.
Park and the beach and the
you got
mountains,
the
and the
mountains
desert,
and
and you got snow in Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm.
you're competing
And the
with
mountains and the valleys and the
Thank you.
don't even know the words.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
How horrible am I?
Oh, you're not an American, apparently.
I know him in the second
No, but
grade.
so I think that there's just all kinds of diverse reasons I think people show up at Christmas and at Easter, and some people are just curious. I think that there are those who are just like, oh, I'll go check this out, because they're open to new experiences and they never tried something like that before. But honestly, I don't meet too many people like that anymore. I meet more people who something's gone on in their life. There's been some upheaval, some terms, something that's happened, and they still know that the church is one place that they're going to go, especially on a day like Easter or Christmas, that they're not going to be shunned, turned away, or, browbeaten kind of stuff. And I think there is a safety for people who feel their sin in some cases to still just show up at church. And, we meet a lot of people who honestly, it's their background. They were Christians or had parents who were Christians. And there's that haunting sense, but something's happened. And they're just like, well, I've tried all these other things. I want to go see. I want to go check out church. Sometimes they come because they were invited by a friend for the first time. I was just reading about Winnie Cooper, the actress. Yeah, I guess
Danica, I think.
Yeah. She was brought to Easter service by what's her name? The from Full House. I just lost her name. But Yeah, and her brother did Growing Pains.
Cameron
Burr.
Candace
Cameron Burr. So she invited her to church, and she gave her life to Christ because it just was like
McKellar, Danica.
Yeah,
McKellar.
Danica McKellar, and she just has been for 2 years now walking with Jesus, and just was super excited about it. And there's just something about the power of the Easter time period and Christmas time period. I just also think that God calls people in. So, I mean, I don't want to not give God the glory for bringing people to church. It's a beautiful thing. So even if we would love people to be more than just twice a year, right?
Just pray that God saves the entire cast of the Wonder Years. That way we can have a really good show again.
Yeah. Oh, would you do was that the song from the Wonder Years?
Yeah. Okay. What would you do?
I love
Joe Cocker.
My daughter's in a choir, like a 70s musical group at CBU, and they did that song last night at their concert. And the gang background vocals they knocked it out, and the band is incredible. It was fun. But
that is
Joe
a great
Cocker's
song.
version
Joe Cocker
of the Beatles
was amazing, and John Belushi's version of him, back in the day, was
on Saturday Night Live,
spot on. So
roll on the floor.
All right, so on with the message for Resurrection Sunday, and one of the statements that you made early in the message was that the resurrection is about reconciliation with God, right? And us receiving Christ, heaven is more about a relationship than it is a destination.
Yeah, no, that was my point. I think my basic point was to attack an assumption, that I think a lot of even Christians hold, that somehow being forgiven of your sins is about going to heaven. Like what were you were telling us, that guy that you were talking to, how did that go?
Yeah, I was discipling a guy. We were meeting for a couple of months, and so we get to this point about Jesus coming to the earth, and so I'm just walking him through, and I'm like, okay, so why did Jesus come? Because I'm just trying to get him to think a little on the next level, because he was kind of giving pretty surface answers, So I'm like, okay, so why did Jesus come? Well, he came so that he could die on the cross. Why? So he could forgive me of my sins. Why? So I could go to heaven. Why? So I could be happy. And it's like heaven, all of what God did was solely so that you could be happy. And I think it challenged me, because I was kind of like going, okay, I'm kind of, I'm following you here, and I know that end result was wrong, So just that idea, I think that we do have kind of a very about us selfish mentality. Heaven isn't about us. Heaven, really isn't for us. It is for Him. It is about Him, and it's about us being reconciled to God, and in relationship with Jesus. And I've always just feel like we think so selfishly about salvation, that it is that I think
it starts individualistically. We think individualistically about heaven, to where it's about like my relationship with God, and that's part of it, but it's a actual relationship. It's a relationship with another being. And I think there's two parts, right? One part is we have a hard time thinking about God as a real person. I was talking to one of my kids, and he was like, I was doing this thing, and I started getting frustrated, and so I started talking to God, and it was like I was in therapy. He was like, talk back to me, and he said these. I'm like, and he was looking at me like, that's not weird, is it? I'm like, no, that's like what a relationship with God's like. You're gonna have an interplay, and it was pretty cool because it did direct him to the good and the beautiful and the true, and he listened, obeyed, and had an amazing experience. But heaven, I think, again, in scriptures always is about God's abode. Like there's a sense that heaven, we think of it as like, we think of it primarily as a location. We think of it as like a space.
It is a location that was created for me to go to be happy, because I
like the movie God. What Dreams May Come, or whatever. That was like this weird kind of new agey.
It's a new age version of heaven,
and
with Robin Williams.
Yeah, and it was sad. It was just not a pretty.
It was pretty
picture.
sad for heaven.
So, but for us, this is not about this is about that relationship. And if heaven and that reconciliation, I think it just, this whole picture of the idea that we have a broken relationship with God. I don't know how people, when you think of God as an abstract concept out there somewhere, it's hard to say that like, oh yeah, I got a relationship. I'm a broken relationship with God. I've never had a relationship with God. Yeah, it's sort of like a dead being talking about like having a relationship with a living being. You're the dead one, scriptures would indicate, in a relationship with, like, in context to God. God's the living one, and you are in a sense dead because you won't have a relationship with him. You don't even know what it looks like or feels like or is experienced like, because there's nothing to relate the context to. And so it's hard when you're like, listen, guys, like, God made you in his image. He made you for a relationship with him. He's a real being that really wants to connect with you, and your sin has broken that. And what he wants to do is reconcile you so much so that the Spirit of God dwells in you, so that God just doesn't save you. He makes, like, you become this little paradise, this little mountain paradise in your own life. It's we go through all the imagery of heaven, from Eden being the paradise, this mountain paradise. I mean, if you want to walk through that, Stephen, that's like...
Yeah, the very first time you hear the word heaven is in the very first verse of the Bible, which talks about God creating the heavens and the earth. I know we say heavens, but that's because of the way it's translated in Hebrew. It's just a plural word. But it's that up there, and then there's here. And in that text, they were created together, and they were always meant to overlap. And so what you have in the Garden of Eden is this picture where heaven and earth are together in one location, overlapping over this Eden. And Jesus is, and the Father and God is there in the midst of all of that. And we are dwelling with him in a place that has a perfection and a relationship. It's a physical place and a spiritual place that's overlapped. What happened after the fall is those two places came out of sync, and they don't overlap in the same way that they used to. There's a chasm, there's a difference between those two places that we don't see, but they do still overlap, but not in as obvious a place. And the only place that they overlapped was in that relationship with God. So you're walking and talking with an actual God in the garden, and that relationship was fractured. And so the idea of being in heaven apart from being God is not a concept that they would have had in the ancient world. And it shouldn't be a concept that we have. It's wherever God is, that's heaven to me. Wherever he dwells and in his abode, where I want to be, and there's a place for me in his abode, then that's heaven. That's heavenly. And the farther away I am from that, the less heaven I'm experiencing in location. So we are in a spiritual world now, but we're in the material part, and we can't see the other side. There's a bit of a chasm. But every so often in the Old Testament, it overlaps, and you get a kind of a peel back of the veil.
A few years ago, I wrote a song where I was just kind of in some desperate state and just kind of needing to like express it in some music and stuff. And so one of the lines that I wound up saying that kind of fits what we're talking about was like, you make heaven heavenly. Like that was that kind of like, the idea is that if God's not there, it's not heaven. It's like if God left heaven, it would be hell. It would be awful. It would be because it wouldn't. It wouldn't be heaven. But not that God could leave heaven, because he is heaven. He makes it what it is. Then that's what's kind of this odd connection. You think of it as, that's why the word kingdom is used. A better way translation to the word kingdom even is reign or rule. Abode. Like you think of a kingdom,
where he's sovereign.
It's always defined as the territory in which the sovereign's rule exists.
And the closer you are to the center of where the king is, the more you're going to experience that. The farther away you are from that, the farther away you're going to feel it as quickly.
And so you get these
interesting.
Yeah, you get these interesting things like Luke 17, verse 20, being asked by the Pharisees when the kingdom of God would come, he answered, "The kingdom of God is not coming in the ways that can be observed. Nor will they say, 'Look, here it is,' or 'there,' for behold, the kingdom of God is in the midst of you." Some translations say it's in you. I think it's in the midst because he's speaking of himself. He's Jesus. He is the king. It's right here in the midst of you. God rules in Jesus. Jesus is God, and that kingdom is right there, or that rule of God, that realm of God is right there. I always wish we had a different word for kingdom. Like, I like realm. Realm
reign,
works.
His reign, I guess, the in the reign.
Yeah. But in
the kingdom language doesn't come across to us because we're not in England.
right, we'd have to use country of God, but that's not something strange.
What's really eerie is some of the imagery that we do get in the Bible is reminiscent, because if a king wanted you to know he was present in the ancient world, they usually built an image of himself somewhere out at the outskirts of the kingdom to remind you of his presence.
That's why you got all these statues.
That's why you do have, that's why you have these pharaoh statues all over the place. It was kind of a reminder of who's the sovereign. And so the idea that when we're in a place and we represent Christ and we act like him, the kingdom is being represented is kind of the image that we have of making a little bit of that Edenic heaven now, because it's not in its fullness, but it's still a part of the kingdom. And so I like those images from the Old Testament, because you can't have heaven without God. And that's wherever he is the closest you are to heaven. And you see that, to me, in a lot of areas where even in the New Testament, where now heaven comes to earth, right? And now wherever Jesus is, that's where you want to be, because that's the closest to heaven. And so the idea would be like, when in my favorite is when John chapter 6, all these people are saying, oh man, that's a difficult thing you're teaching, Jesus. And he turns to the disciples and he's like, where are you going to go? Are you guys going to leave too? And they're like, where else would we go? Only you have the keys to eternal life. You have the words to eternal life. So it's like, your heaven, wherever you are, where else would I want to be? And so the idea of being in heaven is always wanting to be with Jesus. There's no separation between those in my mind. And so you can have a little heaven now. And I think that's the creativity that sometimes we lose in the church when we make it this future earthly place, even if it's earthly or ethereal places, that you can bring in very many senses heaven to people that are experiencing hellish experiences by bringing Christ into their life or acting in a manner that reflects what heaven will be like. And it really will be something similar to what you're doing. Like when you take away someone who's suffering, in the sense by coming around them, loving on them, caring for them, making them feel connected to a family and friends, giving them hope and giving them things to look forward to, what you're doing is creating a little bit of Eden and heaven right here, because you're using Christ to be in the midst of that. And that's a beautiful picture. We shouldn't prolong heaven, is what I'm saying.
now you guys are much better people than I am.
I don't know about that.
Like you were talking about, you're writing that song about you make heaven heavenly, right? So, it's your presence that makes heaven heaven, and and then, quoting that scripture about where else would we go? Heaven be, you are heaven, and it's so enjoyable, right? So now I remember when I was in high school, I went through a phase where I was writing poetry, and I know that in this question, it's on the verge of heresy to some degree.
Okay.
But that's the way my mind works. That's the way my mind works. So, but one of the questions that I was trying to wrestle through in this poem that I wrote was this idea, and I know, at that point too, I was under the understanding that Lucifer was one of, God's archangels, the three archangels, he was one of them. He lived in heaven. He rebelled against God because he was the worship leader and, had pride and was thrown down to earth. So I was under that impression. But also going back to the Garden of Eden, with Adam and Eve, and they dwelt with God, they walked with God, they talked with God. So these people, or beings that were in the presence of God, why was that not good enough? Why would Lucifer rebel against God and, after being in his presence at that time, and why would Adam and Eve rebel against God when they were in the perfect scenario? And then even, in the New Testament, and granted, Christ was a man at the, as well as God, but, Peter rejected him and Judas betrayed him. And, so it just, and then you look at our own lives, and some points we have all rejected God at times. Because I do feel like you have to reject God in a moment to allow yourself to sin, and so, this magnificent being, and everybody's rejecting them. Why?
That's the age-old question. I think that's the actual real question of evil. Not so much the why would God allow all that evil and suffering, but like, why would we choose anything but the wonder and the beauty and the image, this one who is so good and so perfect? I think in some ways it's part of the reminder that there's a deception that was involved. You know, there in why would Satan choose to do so? That is the biggest mystery, I think, that is hard to unravel.
Yeah, not to get into another topic, but this is why I do not favor Calvinism in the sense I do feel like for limited free people, we have limited free will, but the limited free will allows us to make choices to do the alternative of what is good. If we don't have that ability, then we aren't free. We're programmed. And so for me, what allows the devil to do that is his limited free will. Now, is it like mine? Or I don't think it's like human free will in the same sense, because I think the closer you are to God's glory, the heavier the ramifications are for the things you choose to do. So the punishment's a lot more severe in the angelic realm as you're closer to seeing God's glory. So you get that choice, but you don't get another one. And that's because you know more clearly what you're doing, I think. But in our world where there is some veiledness, I think God is long suffering with us, but I think there will be a day where even our free will choices will be given. But I also think that we don't always know we have enough free will to be culpable for our choices, but I don't know if we know the full weight of the choices that we make. Very much like a child that's like willfully defiant and demanding something. They know enough to be rebellious. They don't know enough to how deep that rebellion goes. They don't know how much the wounds carry. You know, when you tell your mom, like, I don't love you or something like that. Now, they don't completely understand what they're doing, but they know enough to know it's hurting and I'm going to hurt you. But I don't think they know the many hours that go through the mother's mind and all the tears and all the wiped boo-boos and all that stuff. God knows that. And so that's why I do think God's able to say, I'm long suffering because I know that you don't fully understand what you say until there's a time in which you're culpable enough to be held accountable to it. So that's why I think that people do that. God is gracious God who wants people to serve him freely. So he allows them to make choices other than him. And he also has a plan, just like most time a good parent has a plan. Like, okay, I know you said all that now, but I'm going to have this plan to show you why this is not the path you want to follow. And you long suffer until it becomes something that they take ownership of and freely choose to live in that world. So most parents, if they deal with a kid for a long period of time, there is a point at which you're like, I can no longer abide by my mercy is turning into allowing you to be, I'm culpable for your sin and I'm not going to allow that to happen. So there's got to be a boundary there. And I think God in the very much sense is the same way. He's very long suffering, but after a while he has to give you over to the thing that you choose. But I think it's just a choice.
What you said though about, the more you are in the presence of God, the less tolerance he has for you.
I think so.
Mm-hmm. The more you are aware.
That's why the angelic beings would not receive another chance.
That's why I don't think they have a chance. Like, there's no way you could be that close to knowing what you're doing and knowing what your role is and knowing what God's doing in creation and then be like, I'm going to do this anyway. Well, okay, there's not going to be a lot more choices after that. It's a pretty definite choice for you. And also that, God's limited free will doesn't require him to say that I have a choice to do whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want, without him having a choice as well. So
I think the devil is just a good indicator of like how deep the deception of sin can go. Like I think you could sit down if you were to have a conversation with him and he would still be convinced that he's in the right. Like after all these centuries, he's still just, I think that's what Screw Tape Letters is so interesting. It's like, everything God's going to do for the good, they figure out some cynical twist on it because
it's so evil.
That can't be what he's up to. And yet they knew him. They had seen him. And that has some massive culpability. But you're right, humanity, where we mature, there's an innocence that goes on there that we betray, and yet it's still rebellion, still sin. But I think that's why he was like, I didn't kill you immediately. Even with Cain, he's like, I don't. Some people think he repents. I still don't think Cain
I don't
repents.
see that,
but like Cain willfully enters into rebellion again, even after he's been given mercy, because I think God had every right to punish and take his life, but he marks him instead and lets him go. It's just, again, this idea of God's long suffering. I think people who try to read a wrath-filled, crazy, angry God into the Old Testament is missing the amount of mercy and patience he's had with these nations, because what's written on a page doesn't remind you that he sat there for a literal hundreds and hundreds of years dealing with these people. So it's a very, very, that's
wooing them back.
Right. And I do think it's a wooing back. I do think that was one of my points, is that the cross is as much to woo us. I didn't use the term woo, but to call us. But it is. It's a sense of he's trying to show off his love. Like, we thought he wasn't loving. We thought he didn't, but he's like, this is how much I love you. I'm willing to suffer for you. So.
He even clothes Adam and Eve. He even has a conversation with rebellious Cain. Like, sin is crouching at your door. It wants to conquer you, but you have you have me, and we're having this conversation. You have the way to get out. And he's like,
I'm warning you.
A loving parent saying, like, you are in rebellion now. Yeah. Like, I could do this now because of your attitude. But
you have those conversations all the time. Hey, if you keep this up, this is going to be this consequence. I don't want you to, and you're not saying it out of meanness. You're saying it out of like, I don't want you to go to this direction. Like, this is going to be bad for you.
Where your parents went. Don't do what your parents. Ask your parents. They'll tell you.
And so this is my struggle in presenting the gospel. Right? There's all kinds of ways to present the gospel, but it's like, what do we do? How do we help somebody come to that understanding of that need now?
For the fact that they're in a rebellion, because they don't feel it. You don't think it's because, I think the hard time with the gospel I have with some people is they don't think that they're in rebellion against God. They don't see what doing things wrong is just normal human behavior. So why would God not be merciful enough?
Well, I was looking it up today, like, why are human beings unpredictable, right? Mm-hmm. I just kind of was asking the question because I do think human beings are unpredictable.
They're also very predictable too.
But, well, I think
both of those exist, I think.
That's why con men are successful.
Right. There's an aspect of our predictability, but it's
a limited predictable factor.
But there is a large factor in humanity because we're free to make choices that aren't going to fit patterns.
They don't.
That's why you get a bell curve. You don't get
it's not a one for
exact
one
answer all the time. That is not that to me is not a predictability if you have a bell curve, because you could end up anywhere on a bell curve.
It's not. They're not like formulas. You pretty much know when you mix certain chemicals together almost always what they're going to do. But with humans, even if you have all the factors that you possibly can have, there's always somebody that ends up making a different choice that throws everything off. Now here's the scary thing. All
the psychology sites that I was looking at, all of them were saying it's because you're unpredictable because of mental illness. Like they're trying to blame all. Like, if we didn't have any mental illnesses, we would all act in the same manner. We would all do these. And I'm like, that is a weird thought.
That's pure deterministic view of psychology.
It is just a weird thought, and it's not.
So every human has some form of mental illness in them.
Yeah, that causes them to be. If they were all just perfectly normal, we'd all fit in these normal patterns, and so we want to move normal. It makes me think of Madeleine L'Engle's book, the Wrinkle in Time.
Wrinkle in Time, yeah.
When you get to Camazotz and everybody bounces the ball exactly at the same time. Like the greatest evil was the amalgamation of all humanity into the same identical things, and not the wonder of the diversity of what
it's
God
uniformity, not unity.
Yeah, and so I think that the hard part when it comes to this gospel presentation is not so much that people, not only that they don't think of themselves as against God. I don't even think they think in those contexts anymore.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, because I was trying to ask, like, if we were trying to write a track at some point. I don't know why we ever happened to it, but one of the things that I was praying about this, because it is, when I'm talking with people, how do you convince someone that they're at war with God? And you need to know that you're at war with God in order to seek reconciliation. And to me, the closest thing I have in our modern world is the Civil War. If you wake up and you're, and going like, wait a minute, this slavery thing does not look good. But you're on the South and your family owns slaves and they're fighting in the other side on the Confederate. If you do absolutely nothing, you're still complicit in the war. Especially if you're of age and you're old enough and you're not fighting back and you're just living off of the luxury of all of the crime and things that have been affected on the people. Your whole economy is based on this sin. And you're like, yeah, I didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything to fix the situation. You have to do what a lot of people did in the South, which was lose their family, go to the North, fight against slavery, join the Union. But you have to actively do something because you have been put in a place that you realize you are on the wrong side of an issue. And to me, that's how it feels as a Christian. As I woke up and I was like, I was living my life. I didn't think I was doing something, but I realized, oh yeah, my activities, my whole livelihood, my whole nature, my selfishness is at war with God just by me sheerly breathing and living out my life the way I do on my own without him. And so in that sense, there's this rebellion that I feel very strongly, but I wasn't aware of it until someone made me aware of it. Once I'm aware of it, now you have a conscious issue. You can choose to just put your head in the sand, pretend like, nah, I'm not really that bad. And there were people who did this in the South. You know, they just kind of thought, well, I wasn't a slaver. I don't need to do anything. And they were complicit in the slavery. They're held not to the same degree as someone who went and actively fought, but they were a part of the cessationist states, right? So to me, it's enough to be considered an enemy of God. So to me, then the idea is that you want to seek out, you want to do whatever it takes to radically reconcile to the right side of an issue. And that does mean movement. That means I've got to confess, I've got to say, what am I doing? And then take a different course. So
I mean, I know there are different routes to that people have taken. Like we were talking about, you were talking about Ray Comfort.
Yeah, I just remember, Ray Comfort, years and years and years ago, probably 20 years ago or so. I remember reading a book called Hell's Best Kept Secret, and that was a great book, and I really gleaned a lot from that book. And part of his approach, because I do think that when presented with the gospel, people respond to it for different reasons, right? I mean, one of them is, sometimes they want a relationship with God. Oh my gosh, this God loves me and I'm drawn to his love and kindness, and therefore I want to serve him. Some people, I think, give their lives to the Lord because they don't want to go to hell. It's not necessarily, that's their first, and that's kind of where he kind of came from too, was, he talks about the 10 Commandments and walks them through this list, because I think his catchphrase at that time too was that people aren't going to desire the cure until they understand and accept their disease, right? So, I mean, one of the examples he gave is if you went to a doctor and the doctor said, here, I want you to take this medication 3 times a day. Okay, I'll see you in 6 months, you go home with the medication, you may or may not take it. But, if the doctor sat there and said, listen, look at these symptoms you're showing, and he just described all these physical symptoms and everything else and said, you've been diagnosed with this disease, it's terminal, you're going to die in 3 months, unless you take this medication, 3 times a day, then that person will go home and they will diligently take that medication 3 times a day because they know what the result of not doing that in. As opposed to, what he says too, opposed to the prosper gospel, instead of just put on God and he's going to make your life so much more comfortable and you'll live such a better life and you'll have blessings, and he's kind of, again, going back to that, it's like when the stewardess hands you a parachute and says, here, hold on to this. It's going to make your ride a little more comfortable and you'll look trendy as you do it. You're not going to think much of it, but it's like the pilots just gave us a SOS. We're going down. We're going to be jumping ship in about 1 minute. You need this. Put it on. You're going to hold that thing with dear life. And so I do think too, when I gave my life to the Lord, I felt like a lot of it was the realization that I was going to hell that flipped me, and it wasn't like I didn't want a relationship with God or I wasn't, thankful or anything. I was like, in awe of him. But the motivating factor was I came to the realization that I was going to hell,
And so this is where I get into a fundamental struggle in our current culture. Like, I do think that has shown to be a successful model to show people the need before you present them the solution. I actually don't necessarily disagree with that. The difficulty, even when I've watched some of his videos online that he's continuing to put out, is that it works with a certain group of people who already kind of have a kind of
Old Testament view or an idea of church or Sunday school.
Right, a background view of God of some kind. And to be honest, I struggle with a different thing. Like, I mean, I'll start with this concept that most civilizations often excel at the things that they worship. So you got the Aztecs who excelled at timekeeping because they worshipped the sun. I mean, they had calendars and invented the number 0 and all this stuff that's sophisticated. And well, yeah, when you're sacrificing to the sun every single day to keep it moving, you're going to be obsessed with the stars and the sun. And so you're going to end up with technology.
Come on, boys, get yourself a Rolex.
Yeah, help you get there, right? And then so you look at other ancient cultures and what they, you got power. I mean, the Romans were really great at inventing machinery for war and how to produce that and produce that kind of sense of like order and power, and they've got structures that way. So you stop and realize that most of the time what we worship is what we excel at. And in our culture, we excel at entertainment, sexuality,
comfort,
right? So you got these major things, and involved in that is the capturing of the imagination then, because of the entertainment world, of a world without God. Like you literally are watching lots and lots and lots of shows that are just happening, ignoring the fact that somebody had to author them, they act like nothing. There's no author, there's no ability, there's no storyteller here. This is just life. And we don't have to acknowledge a storyteller. It's like, but that's the funny thing is like, there's always the credits. You got to have
That is a Wes Anderson movie though, right? Where there is no plot, there is no story. It's just, here's
I like
life.
Wes Anderson.
But that being said, what I'm struggling with is people don't believe that they're credits at the end of their life.
Yeah, they don't think there's any authors.
They didn't think there's an actual author to their life, or they think they're the author, and so why I'm not in rebellion against God. I love myself, kind of thing. What I'm struggling with is like, there's only 2 routes I really see forward in the United States if we're going to see people really start to grip the need for God again, and that there is one, you have to know there's a real God. And I'm not so sure, like, I've done enough pre-evangelistic stuff where we're sitting around and we do like apologetic answers. Like I can do all of the basic logical arguments for the existence of God. And to be quite honest, it just doesn't move people. Like it doesn't motivate them. It doesn't, there's some people that it ticks them off.
But yeah,
but I really, it's really been it's a rare nut that's going to really be, wow, just like galvanized by those arguments. And I mean, there's just, to me, like I've said this on the podcast before, but there's just an overwhelming amount of evidence for God's existence. And yet the imagination is more powerful. Imagination has created a world where even though all this evidence is there, I don't need to believe it. I don't believe it. And so when I tell you that you're not safe because you're not in a right relationship with God, I think that it would be like me saying, hey, I think you're in real danger because you're not in a right Google attack with a Manibu.
Yeah, I've been feeling that way for a long time.
Yeah, and so it's like, wait, what? Like, it just sounds like gibberish words. There's no content to the concept. And so either pre-evangelism in my mind is like, I'm struggling with this because it's like, it's got to either show up in which we do radically good things that expose the existence of God in our lives. Like heaven isn't going to look like we're all comfortable because Jesus is with us, but it's going to look like we're on this mission in a war against hell around us to reconcile. I mean, we're doing crazy, difficult things to love people, and it's got to look something like that. Or, God's got to is going to start showing up in power in miracles to reestablish, I exist here. I mean, I think that's what he had to do with the Pharisees in Israel. One of the reasons Jesus is showing off his power was because they were in the assumption they were all good with God. And what he had to do was go like, no, I need to show you God's actual existence here and stop taking it for granted, and that your Messiah is here. There's something about those things because the miracles tend to make people lean in and go like, oh my gosh, this God's real. And then I tell you, yeah, and you are not in relationship with him. Now that has a bite to it, contrary to anything else. I mean, yeah, fearing hell, but you got to believe in hell. If you don't believe in hell, like, okay, that's your morality and my morality. I'll just go my own zone, and that's where I struggle. It's a tough world to figure out. And so even this gospel presentation to me was, while I think it's the better correction, the question is, what disease are we really trying to point out? That you're going to hell, or that you're literally in opposition to your maker, the living God? And it's...
So if you're talking about pre-evangelism, the biggest arguments in the future are going to be about what is real. because I do think people feel like they shape their own reality. And the true crashing of people's lives are going to be in the areas where reality comes crashing in, and they don't know what to do to process that because they were told that they can create their own reality. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of transhumanism. There's a lot of stuff that people think that technology will transcend to the reality, the ideal reality that I picture life to be. And even that's probably not going to satisfy. And so when people think, I feel this way in my heart, I'm going to change the outside reality to manifest what I feel on the inside, they're going to understand that that's not going to be satisfying. It's not going to feel the way they think it's going to feel for as long as they think it's going to be.
Well, it's the old philosopher's argumentation that they used to ask people, if I would connect you to a machine that gave you every pleasure in the universe for an hour and a half, but you died at the end of it. Or I could, I forget what the other option was, but it's like, or I would connect you to something that gave you meaning for your whole life and it was going to be difficult. And most people used to pick the meaningful route.
No.
Now they're starting to pick the pleasurable route. Like, I'd rather have a
ton of pleasure and then die.
And yet that's because they don't know what meaning is anymore.
I think people think that the feeling of pleasure is going to bring satisfaction, and I've just seen a lot with drugs. I've seen a lot of things with people in virtual reality, and a lot of people doing a lot of addictive behaviors. You think the more of a thing that's good is going to make you good, and that's not true. I mean, a little chocolate's great, but 30 pounds of chocolate, you're puking out your guts, and you think that's going to be good for you until you get it, and then reality crashes in and says you're not designed to take in that much.
That's actually what idolatry
garbage
is.
Yeah.
Idolatry is the consumption of something which only God should fill. It's that he's the only thing you can glut yourself on that isn't going to destroy you.
Because it's good. To me, it's one of these things where the new evangelism is going to have to be, a pre-evangelism is going to have to be convincing people that the reality that they want is really going to harm them. And that you care about that. And that you care that I don't want to see you harmed. I don't want to see you harm yourself. And I don't want to see you destroy yourself with everything that you think you deserve if everyone gave it to you. You would still not be happy. And I think that because you weren't meant to live for yourself, you were meant to live for something greater than yourself.
Are you saying the Matrix is going to become our greatest evangelistic tool ever?
Well, the Matrix deals with a lot of. I know we're dealing with a different form of the gospel, but the beats of the Matrix are stealing from the biblical concept that even though it's grayer, the fact that you know what really is real is going to help you transcend what's going on in your and the thing that you're experiencing.
I'm just talking about Matrix 1.
Yeah,
the
not
other
the other
two
ones, but even
up.
that one is more of a Gnostic. They're using Gnostic ideas, but there are a lot of Christian things that they're borrowing from that come through, and I think that's why that film resonates. There are things that resonate in your life that you really look at that give you deeper meaning than just a temporary, probably center around some godly concept. So I just feel like in the future, when you play video games for 30 hours and then you just don't want to be out of the video game because you realize that the normal life you haven't invested enough in, because because you enjoy that fake life more, you're going to have to make a choice would you want fakeness because it feels good, or reality even though it's bad but it's more meaningful.
Which is why I think, again, going back to the message that I was trying to talk about, is that heaven, I mean, that's what they're trying to produce. You're
trying to make heaven on earth.
As this strange ethereal heaven where it's all pleasure all the time. And Jesus honored the body, honored real life. He honored the gritty humanness of eating and drinking and working and suffering and struggling.
But you transcend.
That is so much more important and so much more beautiful in living than wasting your life away on a visual stimulation of gameplay, or exploring some metaverse that you think is going to give you some pleasure, but you're ignoring the very reality of your own body, and therefore you're limiting your meaning and your ultimate.
Well, you'll gain weight. You'll do lots of things.
But and that's the big struggle for me. Also, it just seems to somehow bypass. Like I don't know about you guys. I've said this a lot, and I it's because it hits me really heavy, and that is like the resurrection is so amazing because God chose to overcome death, and death is a universal fear. I think there's a big sense that in America we're like, oh, we really deceive ourselves thinking we're not scared of death.
Well, our culture would seem to indicate otherwise.
I know. I mean, look at what happened to COVID, right?
Well, just the fact that when people die, everybody does is to try and make them feel like they're not going to die.
You just came from a funeral, so exactly
just the idea that people go into hospitals and then they're just trying to keep them alive, even away from their family. That's what you found out during COVID. We care more about you being alive than feeling alive. You know what I mean? Like, really, like, I feel alive when my family's around. If I'm going to die, they're with me.
Life is relationship, as they said.
Life is relational, not just material. And I think we realize that our world favors material life more than it does anything else.
Well, so I always think that that's like, I mean, if God, I just say it, it's like if God was going to choose something to capture everybody's attention, like what's the one angst every human being has? Well, death. Well, obviously bringing somebody back from the dead should be the greatest news in the world, because if it's claiming
conquer
you're
life.
going to conquer, he's going to conquer death. I think that's why
death and life.
Elon Musk garners so much like attention, because he's like, oh, I'm going to download your content. You're going to live forever. No.
That's what transhumanism is trying to offer you, though. It's trying to get you to transcend the limitations of your body, the limitations of the things that this world brings to you.
Which leads to the other part for me, which is incredible, and I don't think non-Christians or even Christians weigh this that much either, that when you say it's a gift, like, you want to talk about a culture that we're all obsessed with the haves and the have-nots, and the rich have this and the poor don't have that, and we need to equalize and all that. What is more equal than the eternal God giving everyone the same
eternal
exact opportunity, the same exact thing, like eternal life, overcoming death.
No matter how rich you are, you could never have purchased for yourself.
Right, and no matter how poor you are, you have enough. You have enough because God is enough.
But also, you're taking away the biggest obstacle to our achievement, and that's sin. Like, removing sin in heaven, like removing sin in its permanent state when we're located near Christ. That's the ultimate opportunity, is where that's going to start. And you don't even have to wait to get there. You can start now.
Yeah, and so that leads me to like all the other religious perspectives. Like, I think of Islam, and they have this. Oh yeah, we have this relationship with God, but but you have to have it in a very specific cultural manifestation. That honestly, there are laws in Islam you cannot obey living here, because you can't. If you're poor and you can't do the Hajj.
Yeah.
You may be some poor Muslim kid who can't buy a plane ticket to go to Saudi Arabia, and nobody's going to help you with that, because so now your salvation's in jeopardy because you couldn't do one of the pillars of your faith. Or
just the fact that he's not a personal God. You don't get to see him.
No. Yeah. That's the sin of shirk and stuff like that. But yeah. I even go to Mormonism, which is like, you've got to go through these hoops and do these things. That what happens if you don't have the ability to build the
works?
The works problem for me is bigger than people realize. I think we've gotten away from that conversation.
Yeah, what if you're a paraplegic? How are you going to work out your faith? But they're like, well, God's really gracious.
But my point is, like, if you're paraplegic and you're supposed to do these particular things to be saved, it's like, no, it's a gift.
Yeah.
Whatever state you're in, wherever place you're at, it's a gift. It's a gift. It's a gift. It's a gift. And therefore the response ought to be worship. And that's why I don't like this concept of adding anything to it. It's like, he overcame death, the one thing we all fear. He's dealt with the sin, the one thing every moral conscienced human being across the planet has felt. It's why we get incensed with injustice. I just think we're missing it on words somehow.
Yeah.
And he gives it for free.
And I do think that brings us back to why Easter is so important. In 1 Corinthians 15, it says, "Now if Christ is proclaimed as raised from the dead, how can some of you say there is no resurrection of the dead? But if there is no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then your preaching is in vain and your faith is in vain. We are even found to be misrepresenting God, because we testified about God that he raised Christ, whom he did not raise, if it is true that the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile and you are still dead in your sins." And just that whole idea. And it says that, if this is not true, then we as believers should be pitied amongst the world
because we're
of our
suffering.
Belief. And I will say, though, that was one of the things that struck me when I was reading that, was because I know I used to go around telling people that didn't believe, look at, if I'm right, you have lost everything, If there is a God and you don't receive him, you have lost everything and you will suffer in hell forever. But if I'm wrong and there is no God, then I've lost nothing, And then I'm like, so why would I be pitied? And it's because we are supposed to live a life of sacrificing and to where the world would look at us and go, why? Why do you suffer? Why do you sacrifice for others? Why do you do these things and put limits on yourself in order to benefit others and bless others? You're a fool. And so part of me was kind of like, okay, if I really believed that I lost nothing, then probably I'm not suffering enough, or sacrificing enough in this world. And I think too that a lot of times as Christians, we want both, we want to live a comfortable life that, is full of pleasures and everything else and not suffering. And we want the promise of the cross.
And if Jesus is the kingdom of God, then the cross is the symbol of the kingdom of God. That's why the cross is the picture and not the empty tomb completely, is because right now we live the route of the cross. Eternity will be, I think, on earth, on this side, we wear the cross. I believe on the other side, we wear the resurrection. And we will walk about being the picture of the resurrection. We won't need to wear crosses anymore because the suffering is over. It's been paid for. It's done. But the suffering that we're supposed to be doing is a suffering of passion, of love, not a suffering of just only physical suffering. That happens. That's part of being in the fall. But that is also that's the challenge that I always feel is like, why am I giving into this comfort and pleasure and stuff so easily?
Since we've been doing movies, it just reminds me of the Braveheart. So all men die, but not all men really live. So the question is, what is the true meaning of your life? How would you have a meaningful life? I think there are people, even in our comfortable life, I think people are looking for something to suffer for that's got meaning. And I just talk to a lot of men. I think that we've been bought into the idea that we want to be comfortable. We've been taught that we're comfortable. But I think deep down inside, there's a part of us that knows we're meant to do something difficult. And if you always go for the lowest hanging fruit, I think you're selling yourself short and you never feel satisfied with that. And so I do feel like there's something noble about sacrificing for something meaningful. The question is, you got to know what that is, or you could waste your life sacrificing yourself for something foolish.
Yes. If you don't sacrifice for the thing that is noble and you only sacrifice yourself for the things that are foolish, men, you will be on YouTube videos.
Yep, you make a lot of YouTube clicks.
Anything else, guys?
Oh man, there's so much more we could talk about here, from the corporate nature of the spirit and all that thing to the idea. Like my final thought is just when we talk about heaven, like I want to again caution not to be individualistic in the thinking that one of the reasons we gather and we come together, and it's not, you can't just do it over some video only kind of thing. I think that's a fine supplement here and there when you need to, but really the faith is about, the spirit is rarely ever individually indicated. It's always about the corporate together in the spirit. And so there's this sense that the kingdom of God is amongst us as we're together. And so bring somebody along with you to do those great good works. Bring along, gather and worship, gather together.
I think my last thought would just be to those people who, you make comments on YouTube or different little jabs here or there about any belief that you don't really know a lot about. I would say be cautionary on jabbing things that any of us don't really know much about, because of the fact that you could be pushing down something that brings you value, that oftentimes we're so quick to tear things down that we don't believe in anything. And in the end, you're held accountable to the things that are true. So if there really is a God, and you're really not curious, and you really are trying to shoot that down, then I'd caution you as to why. Why is that such a thing that people want to do so quickly? And I would say Christianity has survived, whatever you think of it, for a reason. what is that reason? Even if you don't agree with our reasons, you should know what that is, because it has stood the test of time for many a millennium, and many people hold to it in some fashion form. And the most influential book ever written is the Bible. And so to throw it away so quickly is to throw away the wisdom of the ages, to throw away a lot of things, and to throw away, in my regard, your very salvation. So don't be quick to throw an internet comment out there without actually doing some research or thinking through, or at least contemplating the true meaning of what someone else is saying, because you could be throwing away your very salvation. So
the scoffers who scoff, are you looking at your own scoffing? And
yeah, we all have this tendency. It's not something that Christians lack to do, but we should care enough to look into what we scoff. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that kind of solves it for all of us. No, just kidding. No, but it's fun to kind of roam down those things. And while we don't have any questions this week, if you would like to send us a question, let us know what your question is. You can send that in at rabbittrail@obcc.church. If you want to send commentary, you can send it in to rabbittrail@obcc.church. If you want to send insults, send that to Brent Branchard. I'm just kidding. There's just we would love to just hear from you guys, and your bad jokes, all that stuff. It's all good. We're just glad you joined us on this Rabbit Trail, and we hope that God will bless you through the rest of your week, and we hope you had a great Easter.
And don't forget, if you find that episode that doesn't play on the audio, you get a t-shirt. Just email it to us at rabbittrail@obcc.church. And you guys have a good day. Boom chakalaka.
Bye.